Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, April 12th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 144 days, the game against Michigan in 228 days, and we are heading into the home stretch of Ohio State spring football. Spring game on Saturday in Columbus. Forecast still looking almost miraculously nice for this time of year, pushing 80 degrees, a little sunshine. Should be a delightful day out at Ohio Stadium. And there's going to be a lot of stuff to watch while we are all out at Ohio Stadium on Saturday. And with spring ball kind of wrapping up now, wanted to bring back our good buddy Ross Fulton, one of Buckeye Huddle's X's and O's gurus. Had him on before spring practice to talk about some of the stuff. What are some interesting storylines to watch maybe during the course of the spring? Wanted to bring him back now that we're sort of wrapping up spring ball, heading into the spring game, to talk about some of the stuff he's going to be most interested to see on Saturday, at least on TV, watching the spring game, and see where things have maybe changed a little bit over the course of the spring for Ohio State. So I guess, Ross, let's start with the first thing, which is sort of big picture. Where is the spring game, whether you're in the stadium or watching on TV? Where is that? Have you found that to be a useful tool in terms of evaluating either individual players or schemes or whatever? And in what ways is the spring game just kind of like, well, it's a nice day out in the sunshine, but don't read too much into it?
Yeah, that forecast sounds better than where I live right now, so I'll never hear the end of that. But I think that I think the spring game is, it's interesting. I think it all needs to be taken with a grain of salt, both in terms of scheme and personnel. I mean, I remember, for instance, with Jeff Hafley's first year at Ohio State, they ran a bunch of cover four quarter stuff during the spring and was expecting to see that during the season, and then they never used it. So, I don't think they're like trying to hide things from people. I think it just is still like an evaluation process. For instance, last year, Jim Knowles purposely did not blitz at all during the spring game. So you get pretty vanilla, but I do think in some ways vanilla itself is interesting because you kind of see what they think of as their base scheme plays, and some of that I'm interested in. We can dig into that. And again, same thing on the personnel, like gives you some sense of what they're thinking in terms of who their, starters going to be in pecking order. But, we can all think back to a spring standout that had a limited impact on the season. So again, don't want to evaluate too much off of one game where for the coaching staff, the practices that have come before this are more meaningful.
Yeah, for typical fans, this is the exposure they have to Ohio State football outside of maybe watching some videos that we've put up from inside practices, little 5-minute video clips or whatever from inside practices. For the coaching staff, this is 1/15 of the spring, and not even necessarily the most important 15th of the spring. A lot of times you'll hear coaches talking about some of the earlier scrimmages maybe being even more impactful in their decision-making than the spring game is, because they don't necessarily want to do everything when they're on TV, and they know everyone's watching Big Ten Network. You can do it inside the closed stadium scrimmage or the closed Woody Hayes scrimmage a couple weeks ago, and then nobody sees it. So, all right, so let's talk about a couple of things we talked about beforehand in terms of things you were maybe most intrigued by. Number one, Jim Knowles always calls this a safety-driven defense. It sounds like you're interested to see who is going to be driving those safety positions and how those safety positions might be used this year.
Yeah, I mean, again, just sort of listening to some of the general commentary out there about the spring, there seems to be this ongoing general assumption that, yes, Josh Proctor is at the adjuster middle safety and Latham Ransom is the boundary safety, but at some point, Sonny Styles will replace Proctor and then Ransom will move over. That just doesn't, at this point, seem particularly realistic to me, just based on, what you and Tony and others who are at practice have seen. I mean, to do that, that means you've wasted the entire spring with Latham Ransom practicing as your boundary safety and then moving him over. So you've lost a lot of valuable reps. Instead, I mean, my assumption is that it seems like Proctor and Ransom are pretty locked in, and they seem to have, I think, it seems like, at least based on comments, a role in mind for Styles similar to what he did against Georgia last year, which is essentially be a, Sam linebacker box safety hybrid. When you're facing 12 personnel like they did against Georgia, and those Knowles has repeatedly stated that that's where he's been best thus far, closer to the line of scrimmage. So, again, I don't know if we'll see any of that kind of personnel mixture on Saturday, or whether they'll just stick with their base nickel, with a essentially, their base nickel is essentially a corner safety hybrid. Cam Martinez, obviously Jahad Carter's out, and so they've moved some corners there just to sort of underscore that point. But again, I am still interested in the safety pecking order and sort of how entrenched people seem in various roles.
And one thing to note for you is that we have not yet heard about specific rosters or specific plans for, hey, this is going to be the ones versus the twos, or they're going to draft the teams or whatever. We're going to be talking to Ryan Day on Wednesday around lunchtime, and we may get a little more information from him at that point. But as of the time we're recording this, it's kind of, what's the format going to be? It's going to be like a spring game, I guess. I don't know.
And for my part, I'd much rather see the ones versus the ones and the twos. I do not like the drafting and splitting up rosters. I just think it gets sloppy. Particularly up front, like the offensive line is all about cohesion. So like they're already thin. So if you're splitting up the roster, I just don't think you get much out of it. I'd much rather see them essentially do what they do internally, which is ones versus ones and good on good.
Yeah, and so we'll see if that's what they do. They have done that in the past, but it feels like they have had a slightly different format every single year for the spring game, one way or the other, and it's just, okay, which is this, the not enough offensive lineman year where you tweak it a certain way, or hey, we don't have enough running backs, you got to tweak it that way. There's always something they're working around, so we'll see how that all shakes itself out. But however they do it, this time last year, the spring game was all about, okay, you've got the shiny new defensive coordinator. His name is Jim Knowles. What the heck is he going to do? And it was all about the defensive scheme. And you may have heard something, Ross. Remember I was talking about the jack position once or twice last year? That was kind of one of the big topics last spring. This year, you said you're also interested in what they're doing sort of schematically on defense. What are you interested in seeing this week?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to assume that we will not see any jack, quote unquote, based on Knowles' statements with Mitchell Melton out, and obviously with Steel Chambers out as well now. CJ Hicks has to play, full-time Will, which I'm sure many out there will be interested in watching. But again, I just think that there's things that they needed to improve on schematically that we've talked about defensively, or expand, I guess I would say. And again, we won't see any of that on Saturday, but looking for certainly more coverage variation beyond a lot of focus on, single high with some cover 2 mixed in. Do they mix in some cover 4 concepts that Knowles used at Oklahoma State? Again, we've talked about how they need a more variety of pressure packages that aren't just either rush 4 or rush 6 and play man coverage behind it. So, zone blitzes, creepers, where you bring 4 people, but one of them's a linebacker, drop a defensive end. So things like that. So just looking for, the continued expansion of the scheme.
Well, if you're looking for that, we have good news. They were at various points during practice, during the student appreciation practice we got to watch a little while ago, and then again last Friday, I believe, they were working on, you saw them dropping JT Tuimoloau out in the flat and working on some of that stuff. So I will guess you will see at least a little bit of that during the spring game on Saturday. On the other side of the ball now, Ohio State has a new run game coordinator. He is Justin Fry. We talked a bunch last year about Justin Fry and some of the different blocking stuff that he did out at UCLA that maybe he was going to incorporate at Ohio State. And, the spring game is never great for running backs. Like if you're doing a spring game fantasy draft, number 1, seek help. And number 2, don't pick a running back, because the running backs never do much in the spring game. But what could you potentially learn about that running game, about the running game scheme, maybe more specifically on Saturday during the spring game?
Yeah, and I think as we've talked about before, I expect them to be less stretch dependent. I certainly think they'll continue to run outside zone, but I do expect more variety, in particular more reliance on gap schemes where you're pulling offensive linemen like Power or counter Trey. We already saw that against Georgia when presumably Kevin Wilson had less of a role getting prepared to move to Tulsa. So again, that's what I would be looking for Saturday. Like, to the extent it's going to be, vanilla, like that in of itself tells you something. If like those are what they consider their vanilla plays, it's part of their, base core run scheme. So, I will be looking, again, you can't automatically rely on that as a prediction of what they'll run game 1, but I think, some sort of breakdown between zone and gap runs will be interesting to see.
All right, so that covers the sort of schematic piece of this. Now for the personnel stuff, and there are a bunch of personnel battles still going on. Obviously, the quarterback is the most high profile, but it might not be the most high stakes where there's the biggest gap between the floor and the ceiling there for Ohio State. Where are you maybe most interested in seeing where they stand in terms of personnel battles and guys fighting for starting jobs as of this Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, just on the quarterbacks really quickly. I mean, like everyone else, I'll obviously be interested in their performance. I presume that they'll let both of those guys play with the first string offensive line at times. But again, just one of 15, and who performs better in the spring game doesn't really, I don't think, have too much of an impact on who ultimately is named the starter. But yeah, I mean, I would say right tackle right now to me seems like the biggest issue, just based on reporting that you and others have done from practice. And I think both interested in how they split the reps between those guys, whether that gives us any insight into how they're feeling at this point about their relative roles. I would, again, expect them to rotate, but does one guy play more with the ones than the other, or do they not rotate at all? And then obviously you want to see how they do. I mean, I don't think the spring game is ever particularly kind to offensive linemen. There's been lots of good offensive linemen at Ohio State that haven't good offensive lines that haven't looked good in the spring, particularly when a quarterback is down by no contact, or they're blowing things dead. As you said, it doesn't ever look great for the run game either. But you obviously want to see them handle themselves and see what it looks like, and I think just generally how they're treating the position, because I think there's still the question of whether either of those guys will be the starter at right tackle entering the fall.
Yeah, that's going to definitely be a position to watch. And what do they do after spring ball and all that? Left tackle it feels like they're a little more comfortable there. But yeah, right tackle, we've seen a bunch of Zen Michalski, Tigger Shabola kind of rotating in with the ones at times, but Zen Michalski kind of ahead for the most part. But we'll see how that goes. The quarterbackship, as you mentioned, don't if things look a little rough on Saturday, and they might, don't get too nervous. I'm just going to read you Justin Fields' stat line from the 2019 spring game. Justin Fields, 4 for 13 for 131 yards and a touchdown. However, one of those was a 98-yard pass to Ben Victor. So outside of the 98-yard pass to Ben Victor against a walk-on corner, he was 3 for 12 for 29 yards, no touchdowns, and sacked 4 times. So if things look a little ragged at times on Saturday, don't necessarily climb right over to the edge of the ledge and peer off into the void. It might just be okay. That Justin Fields season worked out okay in 2019. So still a long way to go. And as we've said a couple times this spring, every time the offense looks bad, it means the defense is looking good. So if you would be worried if the defense was looking bad, you're just gonna have to accept that this is a time of the year to feel optimistic about things and try and focus on the positive. The positives such as there's going to be a beautiful day on Saturday. The positives such as you're probably going to get to hear from Ross again next week on what he learned after watching that spring game. And you'll get to hear a bunch from Tony and Mark and Kevin and I on all that kind of stuff on Saturday. We'll have plenty of coverage on our YouTube channel, at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. And of course at BuckeyeHuddle.com as well. Mark is planning to do a instant reaction, like 10 things I learned kind of thing. Immediately after the game, we'll have our post-game show and interviews and all that great stuff on our YouTube channel. So it should be a fun weekend. Make sure you are a part of all that by subscribing at BuckeyeHuddle.com, and then also subscribing at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Hit that bell so you get notified when we go live, so you don't miss any of the fun this weekend. We are looking forward to it. It is football season in Columbus again, sort of. It's as close as we get to football season before actual football season. So enjoy it this weekend, and enjoy it at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.